All right, welcome everyone. I'm Alex Helfand, coordinator for education for the Salty Dogs. And tonight we've got another in our fall webinar series. I'm very happy to introduce you to Tom Besore, who's going to talk tonight about single sideband. And as we've done in the past, please put all your questions into the chat box, and Tom will be sure to answer them when we get to the end of his presentation. So with that, I'm going to disappear, and well, I'll be here, but just you won't see me or hear me. And I'll turn it over to Tom. It's all yours, Tom.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for coming today to listen to the topic of single sideband radio. I'm going to presume that most, if not all of you, either have sideband radio or you're in the process of having it installed on your boats. But it's going to be a good tool, one element of your arsenal of tools to communicate at sea. And so tonight's presentation is to kind of introduce this subject and have a conversation about it, give you some resources, some opportunities to share with one another at the end. If you want to ask some questions or offer your own experience and insight, that would be great. I see we've just had one more person join us, and maybe we'll have one or two more in the upcoming couple minutes as people get connected and get settled. So I'm going to take that opportunity to show you a brief video about why it's essential to have multiple tools to communicate while you're at sea. Some of you may have seen this news story. I think it's quite dated, and it's a little bit funny. It's a little bit odd, but it involves radio communication at sea. And so I'm going to try and present this now if I can. So let's see how that works. Are you guys hearing it? Probably not.
No, Tom, we're not hearing his voice.
Hold on, I've got it. There we go. Okay, now we're coming.
For a week after the search to find him was suspended. We get our report tonight from NBC's Joe Fryer.
How does it feel to be back in dry land?
Ingram couldn't help but kiss dry land. After nearly 2 weeks lost at sea, his sailboat vanished off the coast of Hawaii, and 12 days had passed without a single distress call until the silence was broken yesterday.
Mayday here, Mayday, this is Korea. Anybody picking this up?
Ingram's 4-second plea desperately flung into the air and caught by the Coast Guard.
Great job by the command center to hear it, recognize it.
Grainy video from the Coast Guard shows a Navy destroyer rescuing Ingram.
I got really lucky. It's all about these guys. They're real life heroes.
He was sailing from Molokai to the island of Lanai on Thanksgiving when bad weather knocked his 25-foot vessel on its side, flinging him into the water.
I thought I was going to die, but pulled myself in and I hung in there.
With both masts broken and no radio communication,
Both masts.
It didn't look good.
I was out of water, but I hydrated on fish. Fisherman, so
He hydrated on fish.
wasn't as good as a sushi bar, but that's how I hydrated.
In a move straight out of MacGyver, he fashioned a makeshift radio out of a coat hanger and some wire, launching the garbled Mayday message that eventually brought him home.
I'm a little dazed right now, and
Okay, so that was rather interesting story. Let me get back to this, get out of that. I was fascinated by that story because it talked about radio as a means of rescue at sea. And I don't know how this fellow managed to fashion a radio out of a coat hanger and some wire. There's a lot of parts of that story that don't add up, but it just was a fun example of how radio communication is still relevant at sea and in everything we do. So that's why we're here. We're here to talk about radio, to get you a little bit acquainted with it, really to introduce the subject of HF communication at sea and prompt you for maybe some further inquiry. So a little bit about me. My name is Tom Besore. I'm a ham radio operator for many years, since I was a teenager. Been involved with that. Also been a sailor for many years. I'm really a technology geek, but I love combining my passion of sailing and electronics and radio And most recently, Starlink I'm into. So if you have questions on that, I could be a resource for that as well. But that's not why we're here today. Today, we're here to talk about HF sideband. So a few disclaimers as we get going. I'm not your doctor. I'm not your lawyer. I'm not your private consultant. This presentation is informational and conversational only. Nothing I say should be construed as true, valid, or technically correct. You take what you get and you use it to the best of your ability. Your own specific equipment on your boat is highly customized and requires proper connection, operation, and maintenance. What we're doing here today is simply having a conversation. Like any presentation of a technical topic, we're limited here to both time and varying levels of technical understanding among the participants. This session could easily...
Hey, Tom, can you share
Yeah.
your screen?
Do you see my screen?
Only as a small block. If you use the screen share, it might be able to do it better.
No, I think the reason you don't see it is you may be in, you take a look at your view. You need to be in speaker view in order to see just his material. If you're in gallery view, you'll see everything.
Oh, good. Because what I'm
Tom,
showing is that
right.
I'm showing my full screen.
Right, you are.
Okay, great.
Dan, did that work?
There's different
Yes,
ways
sir.
to view on Zoom. Okay, great. So now we've got that. Maybe that helped other people too if they were having a similar issue. So I think we're all set. Okay, so my goal today is to introduce these topics to you in a general fashion and to invite you for further individual conversation with both me and others in the community. I welcome that. Also, there may be some people in this room who have particular ideas and experience that might be helpful to others. So again, we're here for each other to build upon that experience that we also have. This is not an exhaustive presentation on every possible radio topic. At the end, you may be a little bit disappointed that we don't cover some of the specific things that you want to cover. And that's why I'm inviting you to reach out to me and others, because this presentation is designed to give ideas and resources, excuse me, and prompt further inquiry. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to have a summary of what the topic is. We're going to cover some equipment considerations. We're going to talk about operational considerations, and we're going to talk about science and how that impacts all of this. And then we're going to review it, and we're going to talk about some very specific practical resources that you can use, because I want you to leave this seminar having some specific resources that are useful to you as you engage with radio. And then we'll take some questions and comments from people. Okay, so HF radio communication. I hope everybody is aware that this is not the best way to communicate, and it's not the only way to communicate. We've got satellite, we've got iridium, we've got VHF, we can shout from boat to boat. There's many different ways to communicate, and this is just one tool in our arsenal of tools. But HF radio has some unique characteristics that present a number of opportunities for us that other means of communication do not have. HF radio also has some unique challenges that can present a number of obstacles for us. Okay, some of the advantages of HF communication are that it's in widespread use around the globe. There's a long-standing tradition and experience of people who have been operating over HF radio. Extensive stations around the world, commercial stations, government stations, military, and private. In general, HF communications can be listened to by all. It's a party line communication device. Even if you're transmitting digital data, a lot of times this can be listened to and decoded unless you've got some kind of encryption device. So it's a party line, and it lets everybody listen at once. There's no subscription cost unless you're using something like SailMail that specifically is a private service that charges you. But in general, HF radio has no ongoing costs for subscriptions. And there are many different styles and types of HF communication. We're not just talking about voice. There's digital communications in the form of email, radio teletype, and graphical data as well can be downloaded over the HF radio. But HF is not without its challenges. It's a little bit esoteric. Some consider it to be an old technology. Oh, I don't want SSB because I've got Starlink. So there's a presupposition that newer is better, and that's a challenge. HF is certainly expensive to purchase if you're doing it new. It's expensive to install, especially if you're going to cut your backstay and install an antenna. And it can be expensive to maintain. You've got to watch out for all those connections and wires, and everything needs to be refreshed from time to time, like everything on your boat, due to salt and sea conditions that may impact the physical characteristics of it. HF can be technically complex. You have to know about the science, which we're going to cover a little bit. It can be operationally complex because you've got to know the frequencies, the times, and the dates, and the different services that are available to you. HF is dependent on natural characteristics. We'll cover that a little bit. The sunspot cycle, even the weather can have an impact on the range and quality of your communication over HF radio. And of course, it's dependent on others in the group having operable equipment. If you're the only person with an SSB radio, it's not going to help you so much. So those are a few of the opportunities and a few of the challenges of HF radio communications. But radio does save lives. And I want to take us back to the Titanic. I don't know if and many of you know this, but the Titanic was the first use of radio at sea. The Morse Company had established a Morse code communication station aboard the Titanic, and they had a number of stations on other ships and ground stations. And because the Titanic had Morse code on board, over 700 lives were saved. And that's kind of our history. That's our legacy of why radio has been so important at sea. And because of the Titanic disaster, that's the origin of all the government regulations, not only about lifeboats, but about communications technology at sea. And year after year after year, as the technology has improved, so have the regulations and the required equipment. So radio is very important to us. There are equipment considerations that you have to take into effect. You've got your radio itself, you've got the antenna, you've got a tuner, and you've got a ground system. Those are the four essential components of any HF system. We all know about what the radio and what the antenna is. Many people don't quite understand the tuner. The tuner is a separate black box that electrically connects the radio with the antenna. That's part of the science and the physics part. The tuner is a little black box magic that has some components in there known as capacitors and inductors. And by combining the two capacitance and inductance, it makes the antenna far more efficient. So that's what a tuner is. It's not to be confused with the tuner inside the radio where you change the channel. That's a different kind of tuner. And then, of course, you've got your ground system, whether it's the KISS system that some of you are familiar with, or whether it's copper foil or a dynaplate. There's a number of different things. But my point is that the function of these devices requires proper selection, installation, and maintenance. And then one thing I left off is you got to know about it. You got to practice it. You have to understand what you're working with. Radios, we've got the old standbys, the M710, the M802, which we find in a lot of existing installations. Of course, the newest radio is the ICOM M803 pictured here. You've got a tuner. You've got a backstay antenna that some people install. You've got the GAM antenna, which slides up the shrouds. You've got the KISS ground system, and then you've got a digital interface. So there's a lot of different pieces to this puzzle that have to go together. And each and every one of you have slightly different setups and configurations. And each of those configurations present you with different challenges and opportunities. Among the common points of failure is when people attempt to select, install, and maintain these things without assistance. And there's absolutely no excuse for that because the resources are at your disposal, some of which I'm going to give you today in this presentation. The internet is a wonderful thing. We spend thousands of dollars on marine equipment, not just radios, but the boat, the electrical system, propulsion, sails, water making, batteries. But after spending all this money, sometimes we shortchange ourselves by not utilizing the expertise of others or enlisting professional help where warranted. And this is not limited to sailing. This is in everything we do in everyday life. We want to be independent. We love it. We have that spirit of getting things done, do it yourself. But here's an opportunity, especially with the radio stuff, to draw upon the experience of others and get the professional help when you need it. Common points of failure: corroded connections, old and deteriorated wire, blown fuses, improper routing of wires, improper connection of components. Don't wait until it's too late to inspect, to maintain, and repair. And this is no different than tinkering with your sails or your water maker or your steering mechanism. You've constantly got to be surveying, tinkering, and fixing. And I'm probably preaching to the choir with these types of things to say. Operational considerations play a huge role in HF communications. You've got nothing but options. You've got voice, which is probably what most people think of when they talk about SSB, but you've also got digital. You've got email at sea. You've got SailMail. You've got WinLink, or you've got graphical opportunities to download weather maps or download text-based forecasts using digital modes. You've got emergency voice communications. You've got vessel-to-vessel voice. You've got the rally nets. You've got amateur radio nets, in particular, the Maritime Mobile Service. You've got Pactor and RIDI. You've got digital HF email, both WinLink and SailMail. The difference is that the WinLink system is geared towards the amateur radio community, whereas in the SailMail ecosystem, that's a professional subscription-based service that does not require a ham radio license. You've got NOAA WeatherFax, and of course, you've got commercial advisory services. All of these things available to you over HF radio. You've got to understand the operations of each of these different types of services. You've got to know how to operate your equipment. You've got to gain the appropriate licenses and subscriptions for those services that require them. You've got to understand the different frequency groups and when to use them. You've got to learn the time and the frequency of the nets, and you've got to learn the emergency frequencies and protocols. And this is all experience that you will gain over years of cruising. I'm imagining that a lot of you in the room have extensive sailing and cruising experience, but maybe some of you do not. And this is where we can draw upon the expertise of others as a community and share that knowledge over the course of time. You're not going to get all that knowledge right here. Google is your friend, as you already know, for any type of information. Dockside Radio is a top resource. I'm going to show you that in a few minutes. The National Weather Service is a top resource, having a lot of different facilities for your use. YouTube, of course, for anything. And of course, local ham radio clubs if you want some personal hand-on experience. There is no substitute for practice, for failure, and for learning. Many of the most proficient communicators are ham radio operators. It's a niche hobby for sure, but for those who are technically inclined, it's very satisfying and quite varied because you can mess around with all sorts of different digital and voice modes. Many modes of operating, from simple voice to computer Pactor to graphical weather map reception. And each of these takes practice and patience to figure out how to do it. Science plays a huge role in radio communications. It's dependent on both terrestrial and space weather. Time of day impacts what frequency you're going to want to communicate. Position of the sun, as the sun rises higher in the sky, that makes it more amenable to different frequencies. I'm just always astonished that activity on the sun has an impact on our local radio communication here on Earth, 93 million miles away. You're always seeing stories on the news from time to time about solar flares causing radio blackouts. It's a thing. So the science of radio is closely tied to the equipment and the operational considerations. Radio equipment must facilitate the physics of radio. Many people have tried to operate their daily lives without consideration of physics, and that ends up in huge failures that are sometimes comical in nature. But the physics of radio includes the reception and the transmission equipment, including the electronics, the antennas, and the grounding. You cannot defeat physics. The connections have to be properly done, and you've got to take into consideration the natural features that impact radio communication. Each time slot provides different opportunities and different challenges for radio propagation over short, medium, and long distances. You might find that you turn the radio on super early in the morning and you get crystal clear transmission from a particular distance. And then that radio signal will gradually fade away and the bands will be dead for a number of hours, only to spring back to life later on in the afternoon. And the only way you can really learn this is by talking to others, learning, practicing, reading, and just coming up to speed on how these things all come into play. So HF radio at sea involves equipment considerations, operational considerations, and scientific and natural considerations. These are the three broad categories that we need to worry about. And I like to say there's one more. This is my favorite line of all the presentations I've done. It involves a little bit of black magic, because we never know what is preventing our communications equipment from working. It might be a loose connection that's just slightly loose. The bolt needs to be screwed down a little bit more. It may be the time of day. It may be a sunspot cycle that's impacting us, and we have no other reason for why our communication isn't working except for the fact that there's a solar storm that just arrived 93 million miles from the sun. There's a little bit of black magic involved. Sometimes we fix things after tinkering, and we don't really even know why we fixed it. Why does the KISS ground system work at all? It's just a collection of wires that people throw in the bottom of their boat. Why does copper foil work sometimes and not others? Why is it that the GAM antenna that can be slid up the shrouds, why does that work better than a backstay on certain occasions? And there's all sorts of different factors that come into play, and there's no one correct solution. The only correct solution is the one that works for you. So I have a number of practical resources that I'd like to demonstrate to you that are maybe familiar with some and not so familiar to others. There are links to these resources on my slide deck, which will be available after this presentation. So if you're listening to this and don't have access to that slide deck, find a way to get it. The internet is your friend. That's my message as far as that goes. So let's see if I can pull up a screen and demonstrate some of those resources for you. And then we'll take some questions afterwards. Okay, Dockside Radio is familiar to a lot of people. They've been around a long time. Fellow's name is Gary. He has produced this website. He sells radio systems, Pactor systems, and he's got this wonderful website at docksideradio.com. And across the top of this website, there's all sorts of links for specific information about FCC radio licenses, about Pactor modems, about ICOM radios, about how to enable ham radio mode in your marine radio. He's got lists of sideband nets and frequencies, frequently asked questions, information about weather, facts, and voice. He's got a list of technicians that are available in different geographic areas that can help you, and some other links and things. So Dockside Radio is a terrific go-to source for anything maritime radio related. Highly recommended. The National Weather Service produces a number of products that are pertinent to us at sea, and a lot of this can be received by HF radio. There's all kinds of different forecast zones that they produce predictions and maps and text-based products for. Each of these can be received over the internet, of course, and they can be received by radio, and they can be received by email. Many of you may have already seen this, but recognizing that there are some new people in the group that might not be familiar with this, here's some examples of a wind and wave analysis chart. It's not so easy to understand these things and decode them. You really need to educate yourself ahead of time and not expect to receive this map at sea and be able to understand it right away. So you need to take time ahead of time to understand what these products are. That especially applies to meteorological charts and winds and fronts and that sort of stuff. It's a little bit easier when you deal with a text product. And this is an example of a forecast that was issued. And again, this can be downloaded in digital format over HF radio, which is kind of cool. So how you do that is you visit the web page. And again, I've got all these links for you that'll be included in the slide deck. But National Weather Service Marine Products by U.S. Coast Guard HF Voice. This is yet another tool in your arsenal to receive information at sea. And I may have mentioned this before, but this is produced by your government at great expense to the taxpayer. and literally millions of dollars of equipment and broadcast equipment at multiple locations, not only from the government, but also from private parties and commercial parties. There's huge resources that have been implemented to allow you to communicate at sea. My favorite newest one is Starlink, which is satellite based. And the subscription cost for that is either expensive or priceless, depending on the worth of your life and your loved ones having constant contact with you at sea. Make no mistake, Starlink is radio based. It's just not HF radio. It's more in the gigahertz range by satellite. And that to me is very fascinating. Soon to be the gold standard. Here's another great resource who's affiliated with the Salty Dogs. Apparently he's going to give a seminar in a couple of weeks. He's been an active participant with us in the past, and he has both private and group consultations available. I just had an email exchange with Chris today asking him about Starlink, and he scoffed at me and said, hey, I've been doing simulcasts over the web since 2014. He saw this coming. So he has commercial services that he provides for a fee where he communicates with people over the internet, satellite, whatever communication you've got, he'll be happy to facilitate it. But anyway, Chris has this website, Marine Weather Center, mwxc.com, that provides a number of different resources. And he's got some written material in terms of books, that sort of stuff. So that's a great site for you to check on his marine weather products. The Seven Seas Cruising Association, along with, I think his name is Ken or Glenn Tuttle, operates a radio station out of Florida. And he produces broadcasts every day, every morning. It's 07:15 Eastern and 08:15 Eastern at a frequency of 8104. It's station KPK. And you can read all about it at the SSCA website. It's really a great resource available. The Maritime Mobile Service Network is a group of ham radio operators that operates at 14.300 megahertz. That's the 20-meter ham band. And they take check-ins, they provide weather information, they provide camaraderie. You have to have a ham radio license or have somebody on board with a ham radio license if you want to actively participate in this net. It starts at 12 noon each day, Eastern time, and runs all the way to 10 p.m. And it comes up and down according to the band conditions. Sometimes you hear it, sometimes you don't. I mentioned that you need a ham radio license in order to participate, but in an emergency type of situation, you can always participate. You don't need a license to communicate in an emergency. So just keep that in mind, that if you have a transmitter aboard, you can always use it to preserve your life and safety. The Hurricane WatchNet is another great resource if we find ourselves at sea in a storm condition. Hopefully we've got good enough weather routing that we stay put, but you never know. The Hurricane WatchNet operates at 14313, and they provide information to all mariners at sea. The FCC provides these websites for ship radio station licenses. If you have HF on your boat, you should have a license, a ship station license for it. You should also have an operator's license if you're not a ham radio operator. So both ship radio stations get licenses, as do operators. And along with your ship license comes an international MMSI number that is very useful for identifying yourself and plugging into your DSC system. That's the MMSI page at the FCC website. And again, I'm going to provide you these links. I'm just using this as a point of conversation to identify some practical resources for you right here and now. Got a few more to go through. It is not necessary to have a fancy multiple $1,000 radio system in order to benefit from HF radio. You can get yourself a little receiver. This is the latest, greatest state-of-the-art. It's called a software-defined radio, and it listens to everything from 0.1 to 30 megahertz. And it's really a terrific little receiver. I could even connect it up to my computer and download some of those digital products from the National Weather Service. But it can be used to listen. It can be used to listen to nets and to conversations on both marine and amateur and commercial frequencies. So that's just one example. This is a really cool product. If anybody wants information on this, you can reach out to me. But something a little more accessible is something you can get right on Amazon and have it delivered to you tomorrow. Things like these Sangian radios cover FM, shortwave, medium wave, airband, and they're kind of fun to have along on a trip just for something else to do. If you get tired of fishing and tinkering and polishing your bright work, you can listen to the radio. And it's a couple $100 for this kind of thing. So very useful resource. If you want to get involved in ham radio, there's a group called the American Radio Relay League. It's the National Association for Ham Radio, ARRL.org. They've got all kinds of information in here. You can find local clubs. You can read articles about everything from soup to nuts relating to radio. ARRL is a terrific resource. I mentioned the GAM antenna. It's a simple antenna installation that slides up the backstay or a shroud. Just press it over the backstay and slide it up. It shouldn't work because it's in close proximity to another piece of metal, but it somehow couples with that metal and produces a great signal in certain circumstances. Many satisfied customers. Cost you $500 for an antenna of that nature. But if you've ever heard of the GAM antenna, this is where you get it, gamelectronicsinc.com. For email at sea, WinLink is the nonprofit organization that facilitates radio email and also position reporting. You have to be a ham in order to participate in WinLink. So they have a webpage called winlink.org. SailMail, the commercial email service. You don't have to be a ham radio operator for this, but you do have to have commercial equipment, your HF radio, and a digital interface. That's SailMail. The KISS antenna is a collection of wires that you throw down below, and some people just run them along the bilge. Other people just put them under the seats, just feed them wherever they can, and it seems to work. And they've sold thousands of them. I think there's a comment on here that they've sold thousands of these, over 10,000 sold, and not one returned due to an unsatisfied customer. I find that a little hard to believe, but they say it. But people swear by these KISS radial systems as an effective ground counterpoise. More traditional grounding systems that you'll find in your boat, sometimes embedded into the fiberglass, is this flexible copper grounding strap. And if you find that your grounding strap is all discolored and blue, green, aqua in color and crumbling into your fingertips, then it's time to purchase a new roll. This comes in 50-foot lengths. You could buy it for about $150 with tax, shipping, whatever, from DX Engineering. This is a big ham radio supply house. This is just a demonstration of what the ham bands are. There's all kinds of different frequencies. Why are there so many? Because of physics. Different frequencies offer different propagation characteristics, and they are effective at different times of the day, different types of propagation. It all relates to science and physics. That's why there's so many different places to tune. So that's just an example of what the hams work with. And then just another comment about the Seven Seas Cruising Association. They have this coastal station license, KPK, that's run by Glenn Tuttle in Florida. There's a picture of it in the lower left-hand corner. And this is an example of equipment that people have all over the world. You may find yourself talking to somebody in Florida or Massachusetts or Washington State or Italy. It's just so cool to be able to be on a boat, and if propagation is right and you're talking on sideband, if you have access to the ham channels, you could be talking to somebody in Croatia while you're crossing the Atlantic. And what an amazing conversation. They will all want to talk to you because you're maritime mobile. It's unusual and fun. And if I sound excited about it, it's because I am. I mean, from a young age, I've been involved in radios and electronics, and it's just been a very interesting hobby for me because it's just something that I've done. Drawing to a close here, this is the list of sideband net frequencies that were used last year. You can see it's in Atlantic Standard Time, which is an hour ahead of East Coast time. And at 8 a.m. and 5 p.m., they have these nets. I think the first number is the primary, and then there's an alternate if there's interference. So at 4,000 megahertz and 6,000 megahertz. So that's, we'll put out a list of those specific net frequencies as we get a little bit closer to the time of the rally. So there you have it. That is my very condensed conversation starter to help you get a flavor of radio communication. Those of you that really know about radio and have been involved in it for a long time might feel that this presentation has been a little bit light on detail. Those of you that have no familiarity with radio will certainly have more questions than answers. I am available to you, and I encourage you to give me a call. My contact information is right here. I don't have a boat. I travel on other people's boats, and many times I'm recruited as crew because I have the technical skills to play radio. I do plan to be in Annapolis. If any of you are in Annapolis and want for the boat show and want to have a personal conversation, or if your boat happens to be nearby, feel free to look me up and ask me direct questions. I don't charge for this. This is not my day job. I just have a lot of fun with it, and it gives me an opportunity to interact with people like you and to travel and to do deliveries. That's my passion. I love to travel on different boats and mess with different electronic systems. So that's a little bit about me and why I do this. And of course, there's my contact information, which will also be present in the slide deck if you forget. So boy, that's a lot of information, but it's not enough information. It just touches the surface of where we need to be. And so with that, I'm going to open the floor for questions.
Yeah, Tom, I think what we ought to do is we'll go to the top of the chat. And the first one is actually not a question. It's more of some information from Mike. He's a pilot. And he has an aviation VHF radio
Cool.
as his backup. And I guess if there's a plane in range, you can reach them as well. But here's our first question from William. Is there a radio that can be used both in the marine HF bands, and assuming I have a license, and in the ham bands as well? Or is there one where the ham bands can be activated?
Yes, so your most common marine radio, the ICOMs, the 802 and the 803, are the most common marine certified radios. They're great radios, and they're also 150-watt radios. They pack a lot of power. Those can be opened up into the ham bands with a simple sequence. While you press the on button, you hold F2 or whatever, and then it presents a little icon that demonstrates that it's in amateur mode as well. So those can be operated in the ham frequencies. You also have a dedicated ham radio setups that can be significantly less expensive, but still in the $1,000 to $2,000 range. And those radios could be modified to operate out of band. It's kind of like the speed limit on our nation's roadways. You're supposed to drive the speed limit, but nobody does. And so technically speaking, an amateur radio might not be type certified, might not be authorized for operation in the marine frequencies, but most people still operate it anyway because it's of no consequence. They don't enforce it. Unless you plan to become a pirate radio station and interfere with other communication channels, it's not going to be a problem. So the answer to your question is yes, there are both marine radios that can be operated on amateur frequencies, and there are amateur radios that can be operated on marine frequencies.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay. So the next question is from Brad. I guess his question is around antenna alternatives to the backstay. And I think he's asking about licensing and testing requirements.
Okay, so the backstay antenna is kind of the gold standard as far as technical expertise, but it does require professional fitting because obviously you're messing with your backstay and it needs to be done properly. But that antenna really works, even at the expense. It's the gold standard. But that being said, I mentioned that GAM antenna, and I showed a slide of where to get it. That slide will also be present on the slide deck that will be distributed to people. The GAM antenna just clips on to the shroud or the backstay, and you slide it up, and somehow it works. And I think it has to do with propagation conditions. When the bands are open, so to speak, when the physics allow radio propagation to work easily, that gamma antenna is going to work every bit as good as the backstay antenna. You do have some other options. You can string a long wire up a halyard, but that's really the black magic style. You need to make sure it's insulated, not touching any other metal or human beings. And you need to make sure that's fed into a tuner, and you can load it up. That's what the hams call loading up a piece of random wire. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So you do have a number of different options for antennas, some expensive, some inexpensive. But in general, you get what you pay for, but it's always fun to experiment. Licensing, were there some specific licensing questions or?
Brad, do you want to expand on your question? You can go off mute if you want to talk.
Yeah, I'm wondering mostly about, when I say licensing / testing, I mean, how difficult is it to get some kind of license where you do actually have to pass some sort of a test?
It's depends on your technical ability. A lot of people, especially with the pandemic, are really into online learning. So there's all sorts of online resources. There's offline resources. You can read a few books and pass those tests. The ham radio exams are not for rocket scientists. Yes, there's a little bit of electronics and theory, especially for the advanced and extra class, but you no longer have to know Morse code, and it's certainly within reach of anybody of average intelligence level. And it's kind of fun because some people take a class with a local ham club, and all of the exams are handled by local ham clubs. I think there's going to be some exams up in Annapolis. So if you've got some time on your hands and you want to pursue that option, let me know. I think Joan of the Seven Seas Cruising Association was telling me that there's going to be some exams up there. So it's really a fun hobby. It's kind of like sailing. You get hooked into it and it becomes a lifelong hobby that you can use or not use. That's just another tool in your arsenal. The FCC licenses for the station license on the boat and the operator's license is simply a tax. There's no testing or qualifications to receive those licenses other than pay the FCC their due.
So you're saying that license would be restricted to just what you've been calling the marine band
Right.
frequency? Okay, got it. Thanks.
And they share a lot of common frequencies. There's a bunch of different ham bands. There's a bunch of different marine bands. They may be several thousand megahertz away from one another, but they're generally the same characteristics and the same types of operations. It's just that the ham bands give you a lot more opportunity to practice when you're not in a rally, and also just talk to people whenever. The marine bands tend to be a lot quieter because they're not used as much. Other questions?
Yes. Okay. So the next question is from Dan. Is there any service that we can use to do things like radio checks? And then he's also asking about finding the right frequencies, etc.
So radio checks we can do as a group during the rally, especially during those net times. That would be a great opportunity to do that. And also, if you want to do a radio check, you can arrange that with me and others in the group that want to volunteer, because it gives everybody an opportunity to test it out. The biggest challenge is making sure we're all on a boat at the same time, or whatever the arranged time is, and you'll be able to see if your radio works, because that's the best, obviously, way to tell. But again, it's highly dependent on time of day, atmospheric conditions, and day to day. Sometimes you get on there and it's great. Other days, the same equipment, same setup, and you can't hear a soul. It's maddening. It really is.
Will you be doing any kind of a radio, since you're on my boat at the rally? Are we perhaps going to schedule a time when they can do some radio checks while they're still on shore? And if they need some help, then you could get to it?
Yes, I'll definitely be. I plan to be in Annapolis at the boat show, number one, and I definitely will be in Hampton pre-departure. So your challenge is to reach out to me. I don't imagine there's going to be dozens of people knocking at my door, and if so, then I guess I've done myself in. But I'm happy to put myself out there and come visit your boat. I know Joan Conover has done that a lot, and she may be in Hampton for the start of the rally. I really don't know her schedule, but there are people out there that can help you. And we can also talk by phone and Zoom, whatever works for you. I've already talked to maybe half a dozen people through the Salty Dogs. They've been giving out my number, and I'd love to chat up a storm about this. So feel free to use me as a resource.
Okay, Peter had a question. He's got an ICOM 728 installed on his Catch. He says it works, but is it too old to be useful?
No. If it works, it works. Let me tell you the beauty of the modern radios, the ICOM M802 and the M803. They're very similar to your VHF radios, your new VHF radios, in that they have the red emergency button. What does that red emergency button do for you? If it's connected properly to an antenna and to a GPS system, that red emergency button takes the search out of search and rescue. It allows you to press a button, transmit a distress call, and go tend to your emergency. So that's the feature of a modern HF and a modern VHF radio that have that red emergency button, because they provide location information and they're automatic. And that could be life-saving, because you don't want to be screwing around with your radio if you've got a breach in the hull. So that's the advantage of having the modern equipment. And also the modern equipment will probably operate nicer and better. It's got more bells and whistles and filters. So yes, if you want to and you can afford it, get yourself the modern radio equipment.
Okay, next question. Dan has an ICOM 802. He's going to be in the Annapolis area during the boat show, and he's taking you up on your offer. So
Great. Happy to accommodate you. Give me a
Okay.
holler.
And then, okay, from Dick, the 802, 803 DSC button is a big feature. 802s are still sold outside the US. Non-marine radios do not allow transmit on marine frequencies. Does anybody use group MMSI ability of DSC?
Sadly, digital selective calling has not been well utilized. In theory, it's a wonderful tool. It has been well utilized in emergency situations, but as a general routine, it might be cool, for instance, to have everybody share their MMSI number so that we can do a group call over HF during the rally. In theory, that's a wonderful idea. In practice, I've never, ever seen it done. So that's one of the limitations.
Tom, Alex,
Yep,
Yes.
Tim.
this is Tim Metcalf. We tried a group MMSI 1 year. I thought it was going to be a great idea. We created a group MMSI. We propagated all through the fleet. It was a bust because nobody used it. And my theory, and I own a marine electronics business, is it's just complex enough that people don't understand DSC. They understand push the distress button, but it ends right there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's not convenient. It's too technologically complex, and people don't want to screw with it. But that being said, if somebody does want to practice, if you're a techie, I love tinkering with that kind of thing, and it works. I've sent DSC test calls to the Coast Guard, and they have an automatic number that replies, that sends you an ACK. That's the only time I've ever used the DSC. I just wanted to see if it worked. But I'm telling you, if there's an emergency, that thing could save your life.
Well, we'll practice that on my boat, Tom. Okay, next question. If you get a ham license, is the restricted marine band license needed?
I don't believe so. I think that a ham radio operator has the ability to operate on the marine frequencies as well. I could be wrong on that. I'll have to look that up. That's kind of one of those left field questions I wasn't ready for. But I'm pretty confident that you don't need the extra license.
Okay.
No,
And-
Tom, I agree. I've been on boats with ham operators, and I know you're absolutely right. You don't need a marine license if you've got an unrestricted ham license.
Okay, thanks for validating that.
Yeah, and it looks like our last question. You have another taker. Jeff has an ICOM 802. He's also in the Annapolis area. So, Tom, it sounds like you have a couple of customers.
Great. I'm happy to accommodate anybody that wants my experience and expertise on HF radio. If any of you have any questions on Starlink, I'm also very competent in that as well. I recently took a Starlink dish that was made for a home application, and I cut it apart, took the motors out, I put it in a flat case, and then I took that Starlink dish on a boat, and it worked like magic. You don't need the motors and the aiming because Starlink has thousands of antennas in the air now. And so the Starlink RV service, which is limited in speed, if you're going more than a certain speed, it won't work. But if you want Starlink at sea and know how to put your boat at a standstill, it's probably good practice anyway to heave to from time to time. You can use Starlink at sea as long as you're not moving. And the geographic regions, I think the Caribbean is included in North America, if I'm not mistaken. So Starlink presents a lot of really cool opportunities, and I'm expecting that to be the gold standard. And I don't mean to be talking against ham radio. It's just, or amateur HF SSB. It's just another tool, and it's becoming the gold standard tool in my mind. So if anybody is interested and wants to talk about Starlink, feel free to look me up also.
Hey, Tom.
Yes.
Again, this is Tim. Our members have found, and we are recommending that our Starlink users opt into, I believe it's called mobile priority data when they're offshore.
Yeah. For a limited time. Yeah.
And they've been able to have connectivity all the way offshore. You don't have to stop. I'm a little concerned about monohulls, but multi-hulls certainly have great connectivity.
Yeah, that service works great because there's so many satellites in the air, and it's a great option. It really is cool.
And the mobile priority data is really important.
I've never used the mobile priority data because I'm a cheapskate. I just stop when I want to use it. As long as you're not moving, it senses motion.
I can vouch for what Tim is saying. We use mobile priority as soon as we leave the dock, and it works like a champ, except when it rains. But that's a separate story. We have one more question. Any thoughts about Iridium?
It's still another valuable tool, especially if you've got it, if you're familiar with it, and you have a subscription to it. You might as well keep using it. It's not, it's not being replaced by Starlink, but you've got nothing but options. And this is really a cool side note. People have been moving their boats back and forth to the islands for decades, literally decades. And it used to be a lot more dangerous and lonely back in the day. And some people think that's a good thing because they like to be out of touch with reality. But in terms of safety, the tools that we have today are just astonishing. What a great time to be alive and involved in passage making, because we have so many safety features available to us. I mean, we haven't even touched on the other safety features of AIS beacons and EPIRBs and that sort of stuff. But all these tools are just additional components to keep us alive. And if you ask our families, most of them will say that's a very important thing.
Okay. There was one other question about Starlink with respect to, is it as easy to use with the iPhone as claimed? I'm not quite sure what he means by that.
I hook up my iPhone to my Starlink. The Starlink is just a Wi-Fi hotspot.
Yes.
And I use my phone as usual. And I think my T-Mobile internet still rings through my Starlink. So that's just kind of bizarre. All these things just function together. And
yes.
And that's a good point to raise about the iPhones. The modern iPhones also have a satellite emergency feature where if you're out of cell phone range and you need to place a distress call, they will find you. And so that's yet another tool. It's just crazy, the stuff that we have.
Tom?
Yes.
The iPhone emergency feature uses the Global Star network.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not Starlink, but
Starlink,
if you have a Starlink dish, you can connect to your Starlink dish with your iPhone.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And if you have internet calling enabled on your phone, it's like, last fall my wife got tired of me calling her, and we had 135 megabits down south and east of Bermuda, and she got tired of Amazon boxes coming to the house.
Let me end on a somber note, because a few years back I was involved in a backpacking group, and we were at a meeting at a local bar, and one of the fellows was proudly announcing how he's going off the grid. He's going to go hiking in Colorado to one of the summits. And I asked him if he's taking a PLB, any kind of emergency beacon. And he said, "What are you talking about? I'm going to get away from that." And so, yes, he did. He got dropped off on a 7-day adventure. And when his girlfriend came back to pick him up, he was not there. And he did not come back. And he did not have any means of emergency communication. It took 2 years to find him. And they finally did locate him. And they located him along with his notebook in which he had scrawled that he was having medical issues. He had a brain aneurysm because he failed to acclimate himself with adequate time before going on this adventure. And that's just so sad. And it's had an incredible impact on my own adventuresome lifestyle, where I always like to tell that story to honor my friend, James Nelson, and to remind people that if you have the opportunity to use this technology, you probably should, because it could save your life. Any other questions out there?
It doesn't look like that. Thank you very much, Tom. This was very, very informative. And we encourage everyone to, who have questions, to reach out to Tom, and he'll get back to you. And with that, I will stop the recording for the night.